Hey friends, thanks for clicking on this video and being willing to spend some time with me. I hope this video finds everybody doing well and in good spirits, and as you can tell, I still look like a scruffy nerf herder. But before I get into the main thrust of this particular video, I just want to read another email that we had received from a friend. Kim and I had read an email in a previous video about an XJW going up to a cart, mentioning that he had heard voices in his head, and the JW just relegated it to demonism. It's demonology. And that gentleman happened to see that we were reading that email in that video and responded to it. So I would just like to read to this community the response to us reading that email in our video. Kim and Mike, just by chance, Mark was up at my house watching the World Cup. Prior to the game starting, I was watching your channel. He was aware of my email but had kind of forgotten about it. As he heard his experience being spoken of, he was overcome with emotion. They get it. They really get it, he explained. Do you think they would mind if I said thank you? No, we wouldn't mind at all. You're very welcome. Very welcome. Speaking personally, through Mark's condition, I have learned a small amount about mental health, but I know enough to know I really know very little. From Mark and myself, a very big thank you. And you're very welcome. And, you know, unfortunately, in the religious world, certain groups of people feel that they have the answer to all of our problems, and it all has to do with Satan. It all has to do with demonology. And instead of really sitting down to identify the problem and working to correct the problem, they just relegate it to, well, a red herring. Okay? And that's why I have come to appreciate that Christianity is a social contagion. And it really is. Now, I know that statement's going to upset a whole lot of people, but I'm going to qualify that statement by going back and looking at the creation account. But before I get to that, I also want to acknowledge a comment that was made on a the Magnificent Seven Facebook group. Not going to hide where it comes from. I'm just going to not mention the name of this first, because I want you friends to think about the implication of what was written and shared. And I do have this person's permission to reread this publicly. And when I get done, I'm going to mention this person's name. Through the years, we have all seen these activists come and go. Like fireworks, they make a loud splash, then create mayhem in the community. Groom their egos, then get found out. Balance, integrity, honesty, modesties are all quality that are found to be wanting. Activism, in my humble opinion, is lifelong. A patient game that involves no rules. Just the order of the day at that time, based on passion and gut instinct and the power to see it through. Looking for adulation or a seat on some imaginary throne is bullshit and will always be found out. True salt, true grit is hard to find, but when we find each other, it is lifelong. And that's why Kim and I's relationship with Mark and Cora Latham will be lifelong. Thank you so much, Mark, for allowing me to share this. It's an honor and it's a privilege to not only know you and Cora, but to be considered lifelong friends. Over the years, Kim and I have developed this friendship with Mark and Cora. And it's absolutely true. Neither side is looking to sit on a throne. Neither side is afraid to speak our thoughts in true form, true fashion, true grit, true salt. We're not looking here to be number one, the foremost apostate, or to even have our pictures put alongside Raymond Franz or Barbara Anderson or someone else like that. Look how long it took, friends, before I even acknowledged that it was my wife Kim that helped Deborah Dykstra with the scans in that book that Raymond Franz published, Crisis of Conscience. We're not here for that. We're here to help people figure out what's going on. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like it because, you know, Christianity is a social contagion and it comes from one source, the Bible. Now, you can call that Bible the New World Translation. You could call it the Bible in Living English. You can call it the King James. You can call it whatever you want. But that is the source of this contagion. Allow me to explore that in depth a little further. And for the sake of familiarity, I'm going to be reading it from the New World Trash Translation. Genesis chapter 1. I'm going to start at verse 24. Now, it has been Kim and I's experience over the past decade that many Jehovah's Witnesses waking up will go back and they'll start reading the Bible. And one of the things that they first come across is that there appears to be two creation accounts. And you would be absolutely right, because there are. There are two creation accounts. I'm going to read the first one, Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 24. And God went on to say, "Let the earth put forth living souls according to their kinds, domestic animal and moving animal and wild beast of the earth according to its kind." And it came to be so. And God proceeded to make the wild beast of the earth according to its kind, and the domestic animal according to its kind, and every moving animal of the ground according to its kind. And God got to see that it was good. Now, remember that statement. God got to see that it was good. God declared His creation good. Going on. Verse 26. And God went on to say, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Now, obviously, Watchtower says that this is God speaking to Jesus. Okay, He's not speaking to Himself. He's speaking to His Son, Jesus. Okay, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let him have in subjection the fish of the sea, and the flying creatures of the heavens, and the domestic animals, and all the earth, and every moving animal that is moving upon the earth." And God proceeded to create the man in His image. In God's image, He created him, male and female. He created them. Further, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, become many, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have in subjection the fish of the sea, and the flying creatures of the heavens, and every living creature that is moving upon the earth." God went on to say, "Here I have given to you all vegetation bearing seed, which is on the surface of the whole earth." how could God make that mandate if he created man and put him in the garden? I digress. You need to think that through. Okay, upon the surface of the whole earth, and every tree on which there is fruit of a tree bearing seed, to you let it serve as food, and to every wild beast of the earth, and to every flying creature of the heavens, and to everything moving upon the earth in which there is life, as a soul I have given all green vegetation for food. And it came to be so. So all means all in this context of creation, the first creation account. Verse 31. After that, God saw everything he made, and look, it was very good. And there came to be an evening, and there came to be a morning, a sixth day. Don't your friends find it a little curious that in this particular creation account, this episode, there was no tree of good and bad? Why? Why? Crickets. I hear crickets. You don't have that answer yet, do you? Because there's a secondary creation account. Something went horribly wrong. Okay? Chapter 2, Genesis. Thus the heavens and the earth and all their army came to their completion. And by the seventh day God came to the completion of his work that he had made. And he proceeded to rest on the seventh day from all his work that he made. And God proceeded to bless the seventh day and make it sacred, because on it he had been resting from all his work that he had created for the purpose of making. Now here comes verse 4, chapter 2. If God rested, then why are we reading a secondary creation account? This is the history of the heavens and the earth in the time of their being created, in the day that Jehovah, God, oh, now we have the insertion of God's name. Interesting. God made earth and heaven. Now there was yet no bush of the field found in the earth, and no vegetation of the field was as yet sprouting, because Jehovah God had not made it rain. But you just got done reading in verse 1 that God rested. Why are we reading this account a secondary time? Doesn't anybody think about this? Doesn't anybody realize that there's a contingent being introduced into the human story now? I go on. Let's see, verse 6. But a mist would go up from the earth, and it watered the entire surface of the ground. And Jehovah God proceeded to form the man out of the dust from the ground, and to blow into his... But you just got done reading in chapter 1, God said, let us make man in our image. That was already done. God already blessed them. It was already a done deal. But you're reading it again. Why? What's the purpose? It's to introduce the contingent. Going on, verse 8. Further, Jehovah God planted a garden in Eden. But God had already told the man that he could eat of every fruit of the ground, the entire earth. What's the point in planting a garden now? What's the point? Doesn't anybody think about this stuff? Thus Jehovah God made to grow out of the ground every tree desirable to one's sight, and good for food, and also the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. But wait, the Satan isn't even introduced until the 3rd chapter. So what's the point? Evil doesn't exist at this point. So what's the point of anything or any creature challenging Jehovah's universal sovereignty if evil doesn't even exist? until chapter 3. Think, friends. Think. He already declared it good. He already rested from his works, and now he's continuing his creation by planting a garden for the man, and now planting a tree that has to do with the knowledge of good and evil. That's Kim burning my lunch. Sorry about that. To continue my thought, what's the point? If God had already declared it good, but in the second episode, the second creation account, you're watching God now plant a tree of good and evil, good and bad. Bad doesn't exist universally at this point, does it, friends? That's the contagion. Nobody reads to think this stuff through and see just how absolutely ridiculous this becomes. There's no point in challenging humans with an obedient concept, because bad, evil, doesn't exist, presumably. Going on. I'm going to drop down to verse 15, because verse 10 through 14 is basically a red herring at this point, because now the writer is trying to identify between what rivers, what mountains, whatever the hell it is that the Garden of Eden existed. Oh, so if the writer right here is trying to give directions to the Garden of Eden, do you see what's going on? What's the point in trying to give the directions to where the Garden of Eden is if it hadn't already disappeared by the time this story is getting retold and rewritten? It's another red herring. It's a straw man argument. It's a deflection, isn't it? Verse 15, because this is where it starts getting good. And Jehovah God proceeded to take the man and settle him in the garden to cultivate it and to take care of it. And Jehovah God also laid this command upon the man: from every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction, but as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it, for in the day you eat from it you will positively die. But badness isn't a universal concept at this point, is it? Evil is not a concept at this point, is it? But the very fact that the writer interjects a presumable location of the Garden of Eden, you can see this is written much, 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 much later in human history than from the creation point. Verse 18, and Jehovah God went on to say, it is not good for the man to continue by himself. I'm going to make a helper for him as a complement to him. Do you friends kind of see where I'm going with this? The purpose of the woman being created was to be a complement, a helper, because it's not good for the man to be all alone. Verse 19, now Jehovah God was forming from the ground every wild beast of the field and every flying creature of the heavens, and he began bringing them to the man to see what he would call each one, and whether the man would, and whatever the man would call it, each living soul, that was its name. But we already read the first creation account in chapter 1. Why is this Bible focusing once again on a different storyline? Verse 20. So the man was calling the names of the domestic animals and of the flying creatures and of the heavens and of every wild beast of the field. But for the man there was no helper found as a complement to him. But you already read in chapter 1 that God created them male and female. They already had in subjection the fish of the seas and the flying creatures and all the domestic and wild animals. Why is there more? What's the necessary reason for adding more to this storyline? Why? What? Oh, because of the contingent. Going on. Hence Jehovah God had a deep sleep fall upon the man, and while he was sleeping he took one of his ribs and then closed up the flesh over his place. And Jehovah God proceeded to build the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman and to bring it to the man. And you guys know the rest. Jehovah performs the marriage ceremony between the man and the woman. Okay. I want to go back and focus on for just a second. I'm going to put it right back into the ether. The woman was created as a complement. There was no evil in the universe. There was nobody challenging Jehovah's universal sovereignty. So what's the point of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad? What's the point? And if the woman was created as a complement, then let's continue the storyline. We all know what happens in chapter 3, Genesis. Now the serpent proved to be the most cautious, blah, blah, blah. He got the woman to repeat the mandate. He got the woman to see that the food was good for eating, and she took it. She ate it. Her eyes were open. So was the man. They were both naked. They weren't in fear. They were maybe ashamed or maybe a little embarrassed that God was watching them do the all over the garden. Come on, people. Let's look at this from the ridiculous point that Christians use as a contingent for fear. Okay? Now, we all know how it goes. God's walking around the garden, and, you know, Adam and Eve, they became ashamed. They went and made clothes for themselves. And God is saying, "Where are you? Where are you?" And they went and hid themselves because they were naked. And then God says, "Have you eaten from the tree that I've commanded you not to eat?" Verse 12. And the man, verse 11, yeah, at that, he said, "Who told you that you were naked? From the tree from which I commanded you not to eat, have you eaten?" Verse 12. And the man went on to say, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and so I ate." With that, Jehovah God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" To this the woman replied, "The serpent, it deceived me, and so I ate." It deceived me. Okay? Now we all know how this goes on, how this continues, but before I continue, I want to go to 1 Timothy 2, chapter 11, because, you know, presumably, this is the Apostle Paul giving us better insight into what happened in the Garden of Eden. Okay? Let me put a bookmark there. Yep. 1 Timothy 2:11. Okay. Now, this is a scripture that I've used quite often. This is the scripture that tells the woman to sit down, shut up, and learn in silence. But we should read this a little more closely. 1 Timothy 2:11. Let the women learn in silence with full submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to be in silence. Here comes another red herring, friends, because this has got nothing to do with the woman sitting down, shutting up, and learning in silence. It's got nothing to do with this, so this is a red herring. But this is an important red herring. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. Also Adam was not deceived, but the woman was thoroughly deceived and came to be in transgression. Now remember, Paul's adding the word thoroughly deceived. Verse 15, however, she will be kept safe through childbearing. Wait a minute. How in the hell do we go from the woman sitting down, shutting up, learning in silence, to Eve being thoroughly deceived and being kept safe through childbearing? I go on. Childbearing, provided they continue in faith, in love, And what does faith and love have to do with Eve being kept safe through childbearing? I mean, after all, in Christology, there is no hope of a resurrection for Adam and Eve because they were perfect when they sinned. So what does faith have to do with Eve being thoroughly deceived? Absolutely nothing. It's a complete red herring. But nobody sees this. Why? Because the contagion that's Christianity doesn't allow you to see this. She being kept through childbearing, provided they continue in faith and love and sanctification, along with soundness of mind. Going back to verse 11. Let the woman learn in silence with full submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over the man. So the rest of it about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden has got nothing to do with a woman being told to sit down, shut up, and learn in silence. Okay? You've got to recognize, friends, when you're reading this, you're reading Christology. You're reading the agenda of the Christian state. Okay? If Satan doesn't become Satan until Genesis chapter 3, then there's no point in anything challenging Jehovah's universal sovereignty. So that tree is completely out of the creation context, isn't it? If there's no evil, then there's no point of having that tree. But hold on, let's go back and reread something real quick, because this is actually God's fault. It's not the Satan's fault, it's God's fault. Okay? Genesis chapter 1, and we will reread verse 29. And God went on to say, here I have given to you all vegetation bearing seed which is upon the surface of the whole earth, and every tree on which there is fruit of a tree bearing seed. To you let it serve as food. Every tree means every tree. But remember, let's go back to this scripture, Genesis chapter 2 and verse 9. Thus Jehovah God made to grow out of the ground every tree desirable to one's sight and good for food, and also the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. But what did Satan use? The very mechanism that God put in the garden. Something that was desirable. How do we know that? Right here, verse 6, chapter 3, Genesis. Consequently, the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was something to be longed for to the eyes. Yes, the tree was desirable to look upon. It's God's fault for creating a tree that was desirable to look upon. But here's a bigger problem, because as we read in the contingent theology, when Jesus arrives in all his glory and sits down upon his throne to judge the nations, when he separates the peoples, the goats will go off to the left and the sheep will go off to the right, and the sheep will inherit everlasting life, but the goats will go off into destruction. Here's the problem with that theology. When Jesus does arrive in his full glory, he will judge in like manner, just like his father back in the garden. If Eve was thoroughly deceived, why didn't an omnipotent God a all-present and all-knowing and all-wise God not recognize that she was deceived by the Satan? By Satan? Why didn't that God recognize she was thoroughly deceived? And yet, he still cursed her. He still chose. Where's God's grace in that construct? Do you see why it's a contagion? It screws with humans' thinking ability. If God's omnipotent, all-wise, all-knowing, in all places at all time, he should have recognized that Eve was thoroughly deceived and given her a pass. But no, he continues to curse the woman. Now, for you Jehovah's Witnesses that were willing to stay with this video to this point, this is for you in particular. When Jesus comes back to earth as Michael to do away with the wickedness, and Jesus as Michael pulls you aside and starts questioning you as to why you got involved and stayed involved with an organization that hides child sexual abuse, what are you going to say? But it was that governing body you gave me. They deceived me. There's no excuse for this God putting you to your eternal rest, because he put Eve to her eternal rest using the same thing. But it was the serpent. It deceived me. But it was Stephen Lett. It was David. It was Brother Loesch. It was David Splain. They deceived me. The excuse is gone forever, because there is no grace extended when you're deceived. There is no excuse that you can rely upon when you're deceived. In like manner, Michael/Jesus will judge the same as his Father. Sleep on it, friends. Watch this video a second and third time. Get your Bibles. Read along with me. It's all you got to do. It's not that difficult. And once you walk through the muck and the mire, like I have, like long life friends, Mark and Cora, other lifelong friends. I just got done reading an email earlier in from Mark. You will have your freedom. And like us, you'll have the courage to do this. I am a free, sovereign spirit. Thanks for watching, and you friends, have a blessed day. Bye.